So let me show you how we're going to do it in audio, or how I would do it in audio. Okay, so if I was doing this in audio, just theoretically, I could take all of these, and if I wanted to move them forward, I could just go like this, and I can see where the kick is going to hit and where the snare is going to hit, and I could put like the in-betweens of the snaps of the first of the snare right where the kick is going to land, so I can tell that because I want the beater to stand out in the kick, or I could put it right, somewhere around like there, which is super beneficial because I can look at it directly and I can see, okay, that's where the least amount of conflict is going to happen between the snare and the kick, and that's really great to do that. Now the disadvantages of that are that it's really difficult to replace your samples, and it's really difficult to move around patterns and to keep track of it. Now, what you can do is you can hit Command or Control J and consolidate it, which is cool, but then you can't change it really, because after you do this, you can loop it, but it's there for pretty much the rest of your track, unless you go back and grab the original samples. So, I mean, it's benefits and drawbacks. Another really great thing about using audio is that you can load up the fades or whatever, and you can just do whatever you want. You can shorten it, you can add a little bit, whatever, which is really beneficial. And if you have more stuff going on, like let's say you had your bass was going on the and of every beat, so it was like boom and boom and boom and. Well, you can shorten the kick right here to where when your bass starts, there will be no tail end of the kick going on to conflict with your bass. And you can see this visually. You cannot see it when you're doing MIDI at all. Now, so the big question is, when should I use audio and when should I use MIDI? Well, the answer is whenever you fucking feel like doing either one, because don't let me tell you what to do. But in my opinion, I think you should be using audio when you already have the sample or the specific patch. I mean, by patch, I mean loop. Like, if you already have the pattern in mind, and if you already have the sample in mind, go to audio, because you're going to be getting it down quicker. You're going to be working on what's essentially going to be the final version of that specific track right away. You're not going to be wasting your time. You're going to be being productive from the very beginning. Now, if you're using MIDI, you should be using MIDI when you don't have a specific pattern in mind, or you don't have a specific sample in mind, when you're just trying to write the song, because MIDI is so much faster and it's so much easier to write with. So audio is for final versions, MIDI is for writing. That's my opinion. I mean, feel free to disagree. All right, so now let's talk about the two different ways that you can get groove within audio and MIDI. The first way is simple. It's by using the groove patterns. Using the groove patterns right here in Ableton. Now here is my hi-hat track. I'll play this for you again. Okay, all I've done right here is just written a really basic hi-hat track. I've applied the choke to the 3 different hi-hat samples, all to the same one, so they mute each other. And then I've just added this groove, this MPC groove that I chose, that I liked. That's it. I added a little bit of velocity to each one right here, 40% of velocity, so that way the velocity would affect the volume. And I applied the groove, and it sounded good. And that's it. Now, a lot of times when I'm writing in MIDI, when I really don't have a pattern in mind, I'm just writing for fun, whatever comes to my mind, I will literally just have, besides pretty much the kick and the snare, I'll have every single track just on the same groove. And it works pretty well sometimes. A lot of people say that you should do that with techno music. You should have everything, roughly speaking, on the same groove, but I don't generally agree. I think maybe most of the time that's for the better, but I also like my things to have a little bit of randomness, because I don't like samples hitting at the exact same time. It doesn't sound very good. It's better if you have samples, like let's say I have a congo or whatever that on a different track that's hitting on the exact same note. Well, it's better if one of them is like slightly forward and one of them is slightly back, because that way you can hear the transients of both at the same time. It doesn't sound so much like a big clunk. You can actually clearly make out both of the samples. which is why I add a little bit of randomness to my groove patterns. Now, the other ways to do it is to just do it by hand. And doing it by hand is actually probably the best way to do it if you know straight up what you want it to sound like. The groove patterns I really use when I don't really have anything specific in mind, but I more just want to get it somewhere dancey as quick as possible. When you do it by hand, you can really get it specifically how you want it, with both the volume, the length, and the positioning of the notes. The groove pattern does it all for you. If you do it all by hand, you can get exactly what you're looking for. But of course, it requires more skill, more patience, more concentration, more experience. So it's totally understandable if you want to use grooves. It saves a lot of time and it generally sounds pretty good. But if you can, do it by hand. I've done the snaps here by hand, and I've done the toms by hand. Whoops. Oh yeah, I also did the percussion by hand. Okay, now here's what I've done on this percussion one. I've actually done something unique here, but it sounded good. All of these are right on the groove, right smack on the, I mean not on the groove, right on the note, like right on the 16th grit. There's no groove whatsoever, but the last three I moved them back at the exact same time. So they're all kind of sliding into the downbeat. Sounds pretty good, I like it. I think the main reason why it sounds good is because you don't expect something to be straight in a track where everything else is swingy, which is cool. I dig that. And the tom fill I did right here. Here, I'll solo this because I did a really cool trick here. You guys owe me money for this trick because this is a good one. I've been keeping to myself. All I've done is you take your fill and like your tom fill or whatever you're using really, and for every single note you drag it back a little bit. I've done this ahead of time so I can't demonstrate again. And then you take all these and you drag them back a little bit. All these drag them back a little bit. So basically it's like exponentially they're all getting farther away from each other, if that makes sense. This is really easy to do in Pro Tools where you can, I think the command is Alt-H, and you can shift an entire group of notes forward or backwards by a set amount of samples. So how I would do it there is, just so you know the theory behind this, is I would select all these and hit like 20 samples back, select all these, hit 20 samples back, select all these, hit 40 samples back, select all these, hit 80 samples back, select this one, do 160 samples back. So if that makes sense, it's doubling the amount of time they go back every single time you do it. And it makes it sound like it's slowing down, and then it slows down, but right when the downbeat hits and it drops, whew, it's good stuff. Now, I did this in 2 minutes, so it's not amazing, but if you really spend time with it and really mess with it, you can make something that slows down just slightly, but then boom, once the downbeat hits, it's great. I love it. Check this out. Whoops. Yeah, getting there. I mean, these aren't the biggest tom samples in the world, but it will do for the demonstration purposes. Alrighty, I think that's all I have to say here. With audio and you're doing your grooves, it's the same thing. You got to do it by hand, and that's why I talked about earlier about how audio should be really when you know something's going to be final, both the sample and the pattern, because that way you can do it by hand and you can get it exactly perfect, exactly the way you want it. That's why Ableton is really a writing program. It's for writing music. It's way more for writing than it is for recording or getting a final idea down, because it's so easy to just trade out samples, you know, apply some grooves, move stuff around. It's all MIDI based and it's amazing at that. Now, if you already have your idea in your head, it's easier to use audio or a program like Pro Tools, which is totally designed for recording and not designed for writing. So its strengths and weaknesses, they are different. Neither is better than the other. I hope this helped the guy who asked to talk about grooves. I hope it generally shed some light on this for anyone else out there. Please feel free to ask any questions. I will answer them, I promise. All right, guys, take it easy.